Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and love. Now more than ever, our world needs strong, courageous, and compassionate men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. Now, this movement is called Dad Nation, but ultimately this is for the wives, the children, and the generations to come, because we also believe that every wife and child deserves a father who is pursuing greatness. I am your host, Mitchell Osman, and I am so grateful and I'm humbled that you've chosen to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with me today. Listen, today we've got another incredible episode for you, so let's get into it. All right, welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, Daniel. Just before we jump in, I just want to read a little bit of your introduction just to the guys who are going to be listening. So Daniel, as you're going to meet, has been married to his wife, Rachel, for 15 years. And they have 4 boys from 15 months old all the way to 12 years old, which is, you have an eventful household. Daniel has a passion for helping men, specifically fathers and husbands, along their journey, which most of the time is really sharing the mistakes he's made along the way, and along with some hope that no matter how hard it gets, wounds can be healed and love can win. And he runs an Instagram channel called Honest Fatherhood, which has grown to over 150,000 followers, where he shares advice and insight daily that will challenge and inspire you to be a better father. So welcome to the show, brother. And I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be here. By the way, I love your channel. I was really excited when you reached out. I'm just excited to do this, have this conversation.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hey man, I'm glad you like what I do, because I sure like what you do. And I was just saying this to you earlier, but there's something about your content, dude. Like, I don't know if it's your voice or just speaking from experience or maybe speaking from your pain, but there is just this raw authenticity and this wisdom about you when you share. And I think that's evidenced in how many people follow your account. You have some incredible wisdom to share with people. And so I will say I was excited when you reciprocated and said yes to be on the show, because of what you share. And I thought, man, if I could get this guy on an episode, man, we could talk about some great stuff. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of basically Daniel's top lessons that he's learned in fatherhood. But before we jump into that, Daniel, would you tell us just a little bit more about your journey and what made you start the Instagram channel? Like, what's the genesis story? Because obviously it's big and you're doing a lot of things. So walk us through the story, man.
Yeah, so I used to have, I would say, a negative relationship with social media. I didn't want to do it, and because it takes so much time and attention, and you're always wanting to check it and scroll. So I didn't have one, and then about a year ago, I started writing a book that was the story of my life. Every time I would just tell my whole story to people, they would say, "Man, you should write a book or something and tell people about this." And kind of at the same time, I had different levels of like young men work for me, and when I was self-employed and now at my current job, and they just seem lost and they're always looking for answers. And as their boss, I could tell they would want a mentor too, because at work you talk about leadership and you talk about things that overlap from work into their personal life. And it's like, I'm going to start writing this book about my life. I'm just going to start testing these thoughts. So I started an Instagram page, thought I'll make a couple videos, put these thoughts into the world and just see like if anything resonates with people. It was really also me testing my own message, figuring out what do I want to say? Like, what are my thoughts about trauma, fatherhood, being a dad? So I started the page thinking, if I got to 10,000 followers in a year or two, that'd be an awesome, like, warm market audience to, sell my book to. I had no idea it would get, whatever. It's like 150 something thousand people within a year. So it's been really cool, but that's kind of how it got started. I just wanted to share my journey with other people and see if it resonated, and it's resonated with some.
Yeah, man, it certainly has. If you have time, would you mind sharing with us a little bit of that story about your upbringing and some of those things?
Yeah, I have time. Do you have time to hear it? I'll try to give you sort of the Cliff Notes version. But a lot of it was rooted in trauma, things I went through in my childhood growing up, and how those things affected my marriage, and trying to heal from that, because a lot of those things coupled with trauma that my wife went through, when that perfect storm came together, it almost broke us on several occasions, when just life started to hit us. So having to go through and work on figuring out, how am I hurt by things from my past, and heal from that, because I can't have my wife and kids being the people who continue having to carry those burdens and that hurt, because I never healed. I'm
Mm.
passing on my wounds down the line. So those wounds, they probably started when I was 4. My mom was married to a guy named Cecil. That's my biological father. He was never very involved, so I always called him Cecil. Even when they were married and I was, learning to talk, I never said dad to him.
Mm.
He was always Cecil to me. When I was 4, she divorced him because she didn't want him raising me. But he was an addict. He had multiple affairs. He never worked. Like he was not a good guy by any means. And my mom said, that's it. And so she divorced him, and she remarried when I was 5 to my stepdad. His nickname is Not, and he is who I call dad because he raised me for most of my life. And he came in when I was 5. For us, he was like the knight in shining armor. He was a new Christian. He was on fire for God, and he did all the right stuff. He wrestled with me. He took me everywhere. Like, he would take me to work with them. I remember him like reading his Bible in this back room that we had, but he just led our family and was such a good guy. So for a while, from ages 5 to 10, I kind of had that, two household thing where I was with my mom and dad, or my mom and Not, during the week, and every other weekend. And, at holidays, I would go see Cecil, and he lived at my grandmother's house because, once he divorced my mom, no one was paying his bills anymore. So
Mm.
he went back to live at home. I loved everybody. Honestly, at that point, that didn't feel like trauma, having 2 homes. Like I just got 2 Christmases and 2 birthday parties. And I loved going to grandmother's house because I got to like fish and ride 4-wheelers, or actually we rode 3-wheelers back then because it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
And yeah, right. And I saw Cecil, and to me, Cecil was so cool. My mom never drug him through the mud or talked bad about him. But he, like a lot of addicts, was a charismatic guy. Like, he was huge, like he was strong. He joked a lot. He laughed a lot. He was good at kind of like trash talking and different things. So like I looked up to him. I really loved him. So I loved going to Cecil's house. He would like let me play Nintendo and buy me Ninja Turtles and kind of like the fun dad friend stuff. And then I would come home with to my mom and Not during the week. And so that went on for a while. When I was 10 years old, I had this kind of traumatic moment. So my buddy Travis, he has a Instagram called the Integrated Man Project. He says that's trauma with a capital T. So there was this moment. I was on spring break in 4th grade, and Not called me in. He said, "Son, I need you to sit on the couch. I got to tell you something." It was weird the way he said it. I already knew. I don't recognize this tone or this energy from him. I don't know what's about to happen. So he sat me down. He didn't pull any punches. He just told me. He said, "Your dad, Cecil, I shot his girlfriend. Okay, he's on the run from the police. I need you to come inside because we don't know if he's going to come looking for you or try to get you." Okay. And it was a weird, almost like an out of body experience, the closest thing I've ever had to one, because I couldn't process the information. Like at the same time, I could just didn't make any sense that Cecil, like this Superman, this guy I loved, had done that, because I knew the woman, I knew her sons. He had had a relationship with her. So it, it just sent me down this like waves of numbness. And as an adult, I know it was similar to like a panic attack at this. And also, I just couldn't believe it. So I didn't know what to do. So my body was shutting down, but also the emotions were coming out at the same time. And just in my chest, it just stuck. So I stood up and wanted to walk to my room to process it. I was going to try to, cry. So I made it about 5 steps, and then I just collapsed on the ground. And, my stepdad held me. I cried for a long time. I cried all evening. For the next couple of weeks, my mom took me. We actually went and stayed with some friends. just because we didn't know what was going on with Cecil. He was on the run from the police. And then when he finally was arrested, I came back home, but I came back home different because I felt different now. Uh, like when I went back to school, I was carrying this really heavy weight. Like my friends had parents who were like coaches and pilots and youth pastors. And, my dad was literally on the run for murder. And then later was a convicted felon who was serving out a life sentence. I was like, how am I supposed to go back to like penmanship tests and multiplication tables and soccer at recess? And man, I would just have moments at school where I would go in the bathroom and just cry. And, I felt like I was an outsider looking in. And that's something that trauma does to you is it makes you feel alone, that no one else knows what's going on, that you can't share what you have with other people because other people can't handle it. And those are things that men carry around a lot. But I was a 10-year-old boy carrying this around. And, my parents were like, they didn't know how to navigate that trauma with me either. Like my mom was a hairstylist, my dad was a fireman. Like they didn't know how to help me move through that. And so it was a hard weight to carry. And I didn't tell anyone about it, friends or counselors or pastors, anyone until I was like 17 or 18. I just like carried this thing inside. And then about that same time, and maybe even it had even started, but not had used drugs before, and he had relapsed. Um, from what I've been told, he got into an accident at work, was prescribed some pain medication that started his downfall into drug use. By the time I was 11 or between 11 and ages 12, he was had fallen back into full blown drug addiction. He was also bipolar. And so the way those things interacted was he was angry and like violently angry all the time, or he was feeling like $1,000,000 and he was awesome. So it was either, hey, let's go on vacation, let's do something fun and go skiing or whatever, like on the spur of the moment. And then by the end of the day, like smashing things, cussing at people, and us, leaving and running away in fear, trying to escape. And we lived that way for the rest of my time at home. And it was just a nightmare. It was a cycle of things coming to breaking points where some huge event would happen. Like the time he and I got into a fist fight, like he pulled out some of my hair and I ran, and it was really ugly. We would leave for a while. Like my mom would pack the kids up, we would go. Um, he would promise to get better, promise he'd go to rehab, and not out of insincerity, like he wanted to get better. We would come back and the cycle would repeat, and we just lived in chaos and fear. We never knew what he was going to be like. So we just stayed away from him. Like we would come home, throw our backpacks on the ground and go outside and not come in until he was either passed out from whatever drug he was on or it was time to go to sleep. Like we just lived in that. And when I explain that, I do always want to explain to people it wasn't as easy as my mom just being able to leave, because I had a stepbrother involved in this situation. And she was also at that time his like primary parent, his most stable parent. So if she had left, there's finances, there's a lot of stuff that would have been broken, but we also would have lost my stepbrother because we were related by marriage. So she wasn't willing to do that. So it was just a hard situation, and there was no easy way out of it. And the time I moved out when I was around age 18 because I knew he and I couldn't live together anymore. Like I was never going to be able to sit in my room and listen to him break things and cuss my mom out and do the stuff anymore. Like I was going to challenge him. And I'm glad I never did, because I was going to lose that fight. So I moved out. And when I was 21, I moved to Los Angeles, California from Memphis, Tennessee, where I grew up. And I thought my family was going to fall apart because I wasn't going to be there to kind of smooth the edges, I guess, and or be there for my mom or be there for my brothers. And it was interesting when I left. That was, I think, one of the catalysts for my mom leaving my dad, which was the catalyst for him going to rehab for 12 months. So he ended up going to rehab. It's been a long journey. I was 21, 22 at the time. It's been a long journey for him since. There's been relapses and ups and downs since then, but that was a lot of stuff I carried with me into through high school, into college, and leaving and moving to Los Angeles. And I thought I had healed from a lot of those things. I did a lot of inner work. I found a lot of healing through my faith. I'm a Christian and thought I was okay. And when I got married and started having kids and life were really started to press and the pressures of being a man and an adult came on to me hard, I started realizing I have a lot of wounds from my fathers and the trauma I went through. They're sabotaging my marriage today. So there's been a lot of traumas I've carried that have happened in my marriage since then, but those are the big ones that really have been hard for me in my life.
Wow. Daniel, thank you for sharing, man. That's a powerful story, and I think it makes what you're doing even so much more significant and profound. You are well aware of the statistics, no doubt, of the boys who grow up to be men and follow in the footsteps of their fathers. And so the fact that you have been able to blaze a new trail and see these things redeemed and turned into something beautiful is an incredibly powerful thing, man. So I just want to applaud you, man, and say great job, for doing the tough work. Anyone who's experienced trauma or anything like that will attest to how painful, how challenging it can be. And so no doubt that's where a lot of your strength comes from. Did you say you know Travis from the Integrated Man Project?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm actually, dude, he's gonna be on the podcast in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. He's a good dude. So he has a podcast too, and I was on it. We've gone back and forth a couple of times. A really good dude.
Yeah, this world is not that large. That's wild. I'm always amazed at the connections that we find. Cool. Well, so I asked you to just kind of prepare some thoughts as we were talking before this about some of the top lessons you've learned of fatherhood, and because like I said in the beginning of the show, I just think you have a lot of value to share, a lot of wisdom to share. So, let's just break it down, man. Let's talk about some. So why don't you share with us just some of the lessons you've learned, and if you don't mind, I'll just kind of chime in from here and there to ask some questions because I'm a new dad. You're a very experienced dad, and so if you don't mind, I'd love to just jump in when I can and ask any questions I have.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna pull these things up because I jotted them down because you asked that question. Like, maybe we'll hit 5 lessons you learned from fatherhood, and I was like, I've never written them down that way. I just kind of keep them in my brain.
Yeah.
So I'll go through them and then maybe talk about each one as I go through it because I think it's each one of these is probably a full podcast in and of itself. But the first one, it's in order to love your wife and kids better or to the highest level, you have to put your own self-care first. Um, which seems kind of counterintuitive. It's funny. I had a pastor growing up that used to say, I'll love my wife better because I love her second and I put God first. It's kind of a riff on that thing. But, as men, I think we have a natural inclination to martyr ourselves, to put everyone else's need first. I definitely feel that way. I've always been taught sort of that the highest form of love is to set aside your own needs for the benefit of others, right? You lay your life down for your friends, and that's kind of the greatest version of love. And there's truth to that. You do need to be able to put your needs aside for other people. That is a high form of love. I think where I missed it was that doesn't mean that's what you do 100% of the time, always.
Mm.
There is a point where you can't pour from an empty cup.
Mm.
So if you are not getting your needs met at all and you're constantly martyring yourself for others, it feels loving and it feels good. It feels like that's what a man should do, right? And so if you think about war, it's very obvious. Like you will actually go and lay down your life for the benefit of somebody else. And so men really connect to that. So it's easy for us to just be silent, be quiet, absorb it all, not let anyone know what we're going through, silently drowning and no one know that that's our situation.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times I personally have met men, shook their hands, and they're like, how you doing? Are you doing all right? And I know how to give that answer. Yeah, man, I'm doing great. The wife and kids are doing good and everything looks great. And inside, I'm like, yeah, I'm actually about one day away from having a nervous breakdown. One more thing happens to me and I can't handle it anymore. But I don't tell anyone. It took a long time for me to prioritize self-care because I just thought there's no time for it. My kids have needs. I have to work. My wife has needs. So I just have to, keep going without my needs met and just tough it out until I can't tough it out anymore. Um, and I cannot tell you how much my my wife and kids suffered from that. So here's the paradigm shift I think I needed to have. It's not selfish. It's your wife and kids that pay the cost of you not taking the time to care for yourself,
Mm.
right? They're the ones who pay that cost. So to me, for a man, there's a lot of aspects. To me, there's the spiritual and the emotional, and then there's the physical. And you have to take care of all these things. And it's not super easy to find time to do that. Like, so I don't. It's going to be different for any man. I don't know what resonates with people, but for me, that's like prayer and meditation. That's spending time in nature. It's reading books. I love to read books, especially books on leadership, fatherhood, and family-oriented stuff. And then physical health has been really important too. Just like being in shape, taking care of my diet, and the intention it takes to do that, I think is easier than people think. You just have to create the habit. I'm like, if you have 20 minutes in the morning, or if you can create 45 minutes, you can fit a good amount of self-care in. I'm like, you can get a good workout in 25 minutes. If that's really all you have, you can do a high intensity workout in 20 minutes, take a shower, and then read or listen to a podcast or audiobook on the way to work. There is space for that self-care. Um, where it does get hard to navigate, I've got 4 kids and a wife. It's not easy. And my wife has her own set of needs that she also has to have. There's a lot of intentionality that has to come. Like, how do we actually create space for that self-care um, in our lives, both me and my wife, giving it to each other without feeling guilty that you took it, resenting the other person for taking too much, without seeing each other as the enemy and realizing like this is how we support each other. Taking care of yourself first is a huge lesson that I had to learn. It took me, I'm still learning it, okay, but it took 10 or 12 years for me to realize that's not selfish, it's essential.
Yeah. Well,
So
can I jump in there for a sec? Um,
yeah.
because this is, dude, this is one thing that I see so often with men, and you're right. We have this natural proclivity to lean into, martyring yourself, dying to, falling on the sword, or whatever, because it's noble and it's what they do in the movies. Have you ever read the book No More Mr. Nice Guy?
No.
Okay, fantastic book about what happens when we become just very nice and we suppress all of our needs, when we don't communicate the things that we need the things that we need in our life. And actually, as men, that can drive us into a deeper hole, and then something is going to come out of that, and it's usually not good. What comes out of that? I literally had a guy I was talking with yesterday, was so uncomfortable with sharing the things that he needed with his wife, and how that manifested was he just ignored himself, ignored his needs, ignored it, and it came out as a pornography addiction. It came out into emotional eating. It came out into so many different other things, because we need the relief in one way or another. And so it's so fascinating, because it's like we self-sabotage, because we do this because we want to be the man. We want to serve our family. It's out of good intention, but if we don't communicate and we don't prioritize and actually step into that and take care of ourselves, like you said, who's going to pay for it? Our wife and kids, the very people that we intended to lead and to help, right? And that's been my experience. That's been the experience of so many men that I've talked with as well. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of men, is one thing to actually know what you need to do, but it's another thing to actually feel comfortable communicating those things to your wife without feeling bad about it, right? So, and then when you do, you're wondering, oh man, then you feel bad about taking the time, and maybe you might feel like she's resenting you because you're taking this time, and then it becomes this like juggle, right? So but I say all that to say I completely agree with you. I affirm this because it's been my experience and the experience of so many men that I speak with.
Yeah, let me comment on one thing you said because it has been huge for me in our marriage. So um, when you're from a combative home full of yelling and trauma like I am, there's different ways you respond to that. The way I responded to it, one of the ways I responded to it was by wanting to keep the peace. So that manifests as being a people pleaser,
Mm.
right? So, and that plays into this idea of like being a martyr and martyring yourself. So with my wife, she is opinionated. She didn't come from the same kind of conflict, and she definitely has needs, and she wants to address issues when they come up. And for me to not challenge her when I felt like I needed to not argue with her, or to not give my needs because I didn't want to have a confrontation or have a difficult conversation. She knows that. Like your wife can sense those things, that
Mm.
you're keeping something inside. And I think for her, at least speaking of my marriage, for her, that bred mistrust. And it made her want to, what came off as control, made her seem more controlling because she's pushing harder, because she's trying to get the real truth out of me. She doesn't want the people pleaser answer. She wants my honest answer, because what happens with people pleasers, because I have done this, is we people please until we get burned out, and then we get like the volcano erupts, right? There's no healthy conflict handling or meeting of your needs along the way. It's, I'm perfect, everything's great, let's keep the peace. And now I'm at level 10. All of a sudden, I want to go to war because I feel taken advantage of, because I let someone take advantage of me because I didn't stand up for my thoughts, my needs, or my opinion. And my wife, she didn't want me to keep the peace. She wanted honesty from me, which meant I have to learn how to have conflict. And the conflict doesn't have to look like what my dad did. It can look like something more healthy than that. That's a really hard thing for a people pleaser to go to, because it feels like death to your soul to willingly enter into conflict with somebody for the good of establishing trust. That's been hard for me on every level. Like when I have employees at work who are not showing up on time or being late or just not working hard, and I have to have a confrontational conversation with them, that's also hard. But if I really am going to act like I love people and that I really care about them, I have to be willing to go into that tension and hold it. You touched on that, and that's actually been really huge for me in my marriage.
Yeah, I mean it's the great paradox, or that juxtaposition, because you want to love, so you don't communicate, and then so you die to your needs, and then it gets worse, but you want to keep loving, so you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to have conflict. And you do all of these things out of great intention, right? But what manifests from that is never good. Yeah, man, I agree.
I do remember one thought, because it's really important when it comes to self care, and that's that rest is not escapism. So for the longest time, I think for my wife and I both, we were so busy and so burnt out that we didn't have any energy to do things that bring us rest, right? Because rest should rejuvenate you. You take a nap, you wake up, you're rejuvenated. I go on a hike and I come back and I feel better. Like I'm going to have more patience. I'm reset. That's great. I spend time praying or reading a book. I come fulfilled. I spend time scrolling my phone, or doing something like that. It feels like a break, but it's not. It's just a pause, and I'm coming right back into my burnout stage with just a temporary gap. And I'm not saying don't ever watch TV or get on your phone. I'm saying though that escapism does not equal rest, and rest sometimes takes work, right? Rest isn't the absence of work or the absence of using energy. So you can't let yourself get so burned out that you don't have the energy to do restful things like working out or running. That can be hugely life giving. But if you're so tired you can barely stand, you're unlikely to have the motivation or the discipline to go run. So um, be careful, watch yourself and watch your spouse to make sure you're actually resting and not just escaping.
Mm. You know what? I'm gonna tag onto that. I feel like we're
Good.
not gonna get past point one here, but
All good.
I'm also super passionate about this. I literally just taught a workshop about rest. I did in a podcast episode. If you're interested in this idea, where I talk about the Sabbath and I talk about rest, it's called Rest and Peace. Rest and Peace, if you want to check it out. But a framework that I've used in the past to articulate exactly what you're saying is how we use our time, and are we using it to energize, or are we using it to escape? And that's really, with every chunk of time we have to ask ourselves that question: how am I using this time, which is currency? Am I using this to energize or escape? And the challenging thing with escapes is they often mask themselves as energizers. Like, I'm just going to come home, turn on Netflix and just shut off. But I need this. This is for me, or like I'm going to scroll Instagram. I need this. But really what happens is you just shut off your brain and you wake up the next day start trying to pour from an empty cup because you never built back in. You never poured anything back in. And so the question becomes, instead of escaping, how am I using this time to energize, pour into myself so that I can pour out for my family, for my coworkers, those I'm leading. And so then I walk people through an exercise of like actually tallying up these things that we do in our spare time and categorizing them. Is this an escape or is this an energizer? And let's be real and honest. And it's fascinating every time I do this with men, how much of their time they spend escaping, and they called it energizing. And you're right. Energizers would be ways that you're like, reading, exercising, having quality time with your spouse, doing something engaging physically, mentally, emotionally, spending quality time with your family. And it is incredible as a leader, as a husband, as a father, what happens when you start to turn the tables and utilize that time to energize. It's awesome.
You're right. We're not going to get past number one. So I remember when I was self-employed and I was getting a business off the ground, and I was willing to work insane hours, but I was I was a self-employed landscape designer. But at the time when I was just getting started, I was doing the designs, the billing, meeting with clients, digging the holes, I was doing everything so that I never shut off. I was so exhausted. And, at the end of the night, my wife, it's like 8:30, and Rachel wants to have conversation. She's ready to connect. And she's a person, like, she thrives on connection. That gives her life and energy. And she wants to talk to me. Now I'm just falling asleep. I don't remember if I said this, but she knew it. At some point I was like, when you keep pressuring me to have these conversations with you, when I'm too tired and exhausted, you're being unsupportive of me, and you're becoming another obligation, another thing I have to do. So just say to your wife, who needs that from you, who married you, and you promised that you were going to be the one to do this stuff with her, hey, you are not being supportive. In fact, you're being another obligation that I have to do at the on my checklist. What that would do to her soul, it was devastating to her. And it was because I was too burned out. I didn't have the energy to engage with her at the end of the night. Mm-hmm. So she did become an obligation. So that's what I mean. Like, your wife pays the cost of your burnout more than you do.
Absolutely. I'll never forget the day I came home from work. I was in a similar season, man. We were paying off debt and we were just making ends meet. And I was working 3 part-time jobs. I've shared this story in the past in other episodes, but my wife looked at me and she said, everyone else gets the Mitch buffet, and you come home and you give me the scraps that are left over. And I remember that was such a sobering moment. And she was like, I feel like an inconvenience, and anybody's listening who's not married, take some notes. These are things you should not say to your wife.
Exactly. Yeah. We've had to do a lot of work to heal those things.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of patience, because you can't just say sorry for that and I'll try to do better. You have to show up for sometimes months and years to really heal that. And then if you fall back into it 5 years later, you'll realize those wounds are still there. We're still, like, these things don't go away. All right. Number 2.
Let's do it. Let's do it, man. Because you know what? I read this one and I was like, dang, all right, where's this going to go? So I'm all in. Hey, friend, thank you so much for tuning into the Dad Nation podcast today. And because you're here, I want to give you a free gift for listening. And this is called Igniting Intimacy. 44 questions to ask your wife to connect deeply and spark intimacy. Maybe you're watching this and you just feel like conversation is just growing real boring in your marriage. Or maybe you've heard from your wife that she feels like she's married to a robot, or that we don't ever talk anymore, or you don't talk about how you feel. If you've heard any of these things from your wife or felt any of these things, you need to download this free gift for you, because listen, the key to connection with your wife is through quality conversation and quality questions. Okay, I promise this will not disappoint. So check out the show notes below. on YouTube or whatever streaming platform you're listening on. Or you could just head to dadnationcode.com/intimacy for that free gift for you, my friend. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, so this is a big one for me. I think men, especially boys, we have this question on our heart from day one, and that's, am I enough? When it's my turn to face the world, I have a wife and kids and career, am I going to be capable? Am I going to be able to love my wife, make enough money, be a good dad? Do I have what it takes, or am I going to get crushed? Right? I carried this question unanswered, largely unanswered. It's my marriage because I did not have a father who affirmed it for me. So in fatherhood, I'm always saying, to dads, it is your job as a father to affirm that for your son, that he can be enough, that he is enough, but you can't just affirm it. You are giving him the experiences to build the confidence along the way, right? So you're like, just a small example, if your child wants to be able to run a 7-minute mile and they can't, you don't want to be fake and say, well, you're a fast runner. They know that they're not if they're the slowest kid in class. But if you want to say to them, you are capable, but we're going to go through some work to get there. And then you affirm them and help them run and teach them and give them those experiences along the way until they can run a 7-minute mile. That's parenting. That's being a father. That's both affirming that they can and affirming the process, so that one day, when they do have to face the world for the first time, they are entering into marriage and careers with these huge insecurities, because those insecurities cause all kind of imbalances, which is what caused me to overwork. My dad didn't provide, neither one of them, emotionally or financially, in the way that they should have. My mom did all of that stuff. I was not going to be like my dad. So I worked so hard, and I did it to the exclusion of the emotional provision that was my job to give to my wife and then later to my kids, right? So getting back to the point, it's, what are you going to do with the question of, am I enough? And so this is my theory, right? And this is just my opinion. I think every man faces that question at some point. When you're a child, you think you can never be. Like, how could I ever be able to handle all the things dad handles? That's why dad's such a Superman. When you're like 21, if you're like me, you have this arrogance, like, of course I'm enough. I'm going to be better than my dad was. I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 25. And my wife is going to think I'm the biggest rock star ever. This is going to be awesome. Like, because you haven't faced anything hard enough to actually test like your muster, right? So you're overly arrogant. And then at some point, when you realize being the perfect husband, the perfect provider, the perfect dad, all those things, whatever your definition of enough was, you're falling short. How you handle that question determines a lot. I think when men hit it, we have these different responses, right? So I've got 4 responses. I'll hit them really quick, but I think the first guy did what I did. I've had all these different responses. The first one was that I just said, I am going to be enough. I'm going to keep going for it. Like, we admit that we're not enough, right? We think there's a little humility there, but we still think, but when I hit this point, I think for me at the time, it's like when I can make 6 figures and work under 40 hours a week or whatever, like there's some metric that says I'm enough, right? Because that's how dudes think. That's how the professional world thinks. Like, you hit this many sales, you get this promotion, and you're enough at work. It's hard to define that at home. And so the longer you go pursuing this idea of being enough and not hitting it, the harder it is for you. Some people, I think, hit it with denial. I've done that too, and just think, I am enough. Anytime my wife says something or my kids have a need that might mean or imply that I'm not enough, like, they're wrong, right? And I can't tell you how many times I made my wife wrong. Even in the example I gave earlier of her wanting to talk to me at night when I was tired, that hit that I was under pressure. Like, my need to support us and this business that I'm building means I don't have enough to engage in conversation. She's asking for it, and it's making me feel like I'm not enough. There's too much weight on me. So let me turn around and blame her. At the time, I wasn't aware that that's all that was going on, but that is what was happening in my heart and in my mind. All right. So you just, and I think some men, there's this like fake bravado. There's this like macho and a pride and arrogance. It's like, I am enough, and I can do it. And you sort of are in denial about the places where you're failing and won't admit it.
Hmm.
And the flip side to pride is always pity. When the prideful man falls, he falls into self pity. It's two sides of the same coin. When you do finally crash and you realize you can't do it, you just want to be defeated. Like, I'll never be enough. I'm a victim. Life is too hard. And you just kind of go along in that sort of frame of mind. I think the guy that's caught in the cycle of pride and pity kind of goes in these like mountains of, I'm enough. I'm doing awesome. I'm killing it. We're not fighting. Bills are good. It's great. Something in life happens and you crash into pity. These things happen and now I can't do it. And I'm going to blame other people. Um, Here's the life lesson that I think is key is to realize you shouldn't be asking that question. That question needs a paradigm shift. You're never supposed to be enough, right? Your wife isn't asking that of you. It's a prideful question that's very self centered, like it's looking inward to you. Does that make sense? When I say like the question is a self centered question, it's focused on your identity and making you feel affirmed or validated about something and that need that you have, getting that need met. So if you could come to terms with, I don't need to be enough. Like I'm not enough and that's okay. That was never the goal. My wife never needed that from me. She never needed me to be the perfect husband, to have all the money, to provide in all the perfect ways, to be the perfect dad. My kids weren't asking that of me. There was never anyone putting that pressure on me. I was putting that pressure on myself in a way where I couldn't live under the weight of it. And the weight of failure, the guilt and shame of not being what I thought was enough was crippling me. So it's almost like what we were talking about before, in that a man will put more weight on himself than he should, and then he cripples his own self. But it's good intentions because you want to be the best dad ever. You want to be the perfect dad. You want to provide in all the ways. So I think you need to come to terms with the challenges in life are not there to prove that you're enough, or they're not a test to show you that you are. They're building you and making you into a better man, right? There's no destination of enough. You're always just getting better. And when you realize I'm never going to get to enough, I need to get that question out of my mind. I need to get into growth and repair. Wherever I'm not, wherever I hurt people, wherever I'm not enough, I need to repair. I yelled at my kids because I don't have the maturity or the patience or the grace or whatever to be able to handle whatever behaviors they have or whatever stress I'm carrying. And I yelled at them, okay, in a way that I know I shouldn't have. I need to repair and then I need to grow. I can't go in my room and cry like I'm such a bad dad. I'm yelling just the way that my dad did, um, and these kinds of things. So it's a big question. Every man comes to it. And I really think your answer to that and how you cope with it determines a lot of things in your life. So
Mm.
that's number two.
Okay. I thought this episode was supposed to be about you, but apparently you've been telling my life journey for the past 15 years, dude.
Man, a
Crazy.
lot of men feel this stuff.
Dude,
It's common.
it's wild, man. It's like you're totally reading my mail. I read a book a few years ago now it's called The Way of the Superior Man by David Data, and he talks about something, and he calls it the great masculine error, and that is that one day I will be enough. That one day the work will be done. That one day I can just sit back on my porch and sip my coffee, whittle my stick, and then be good. And really kind of it's a different nuance to it. What he's saying is what the problems we get into when we chase perfection, the problems we get into when we think that um, in shooting for that moving target, that's always changing, right? Because there's always going to be needs from different people, from your career, from personal life. And if the goal is perfection, you'll drive yourself insane, and if you don't know how to handle that. So, dude, it's so true. Sometimes my wife has been like, I don't need you to to make this much money. I don't need you to have these many businesses. I just want you to sit down on the couch and talk with me. Like,
Mhm.
that's it. I'm like, what? But there's all these other things. Like, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
remember there were moments earlier in our marriage where I would have these epiphanies or these moments of revelation of being like, how could you just want that one small thing? I don't get it. Where I'm thinking a year down the road, I'm thinking about our retirement plan. I'm thinking about, and I'm carrying this weight. And she's like, hey, would you just be here with me and like rub my back and talk to me? And I just could not, it's like I couldn't wrap my head around it. And so, yeah, man, I so resonate with that point.
Yeah. It's hard. I always think about, I don't do the things that I do now to answer the question, am I enough? I do it because it's loving and because it's right. So I can have the same goal, the same picture of what does that man look like? Like I'm still shooting for the stars, to be this awesome man. But with the shift in motivation and narrative, um, I could keep going. And now I don't lash out at my wife when she says something to me like, hey, you're leaving your towels all over the floor. Can you pick that up? And I'm like, oh, that in some small way triggers the I'm not enough. And I'm like, do you see everything that I'm doing? And you point out this one wrong thing. Like, how can you be so unappreciative? And I'm lashing out. It's because she pushed the button that somehow in my mind says, you're not doing enough. And that sabotages so much of our relationships with everybody. I mean, if you're failing at home, so I think this might have been one of my other points, so I might be skipping ahead, but
Hey, man, do it.
if you're failing at home and you desperately need the answer to the question of am I enough, you're gonna go for it at work or somewhere where you are winning. And I have done that so many times. It's like my marriage is falling apart. Rachel's mad at me. We've been in a state of conflict and fight for like 2 weeks. And I don't know how to fix that. But these clients or these people think I am the best landscaper, or now I'm a director of horticulture at a public garden. Like they think I'm killing it. My employees look up to me. My boss is saying good things about me. I'm like, she may not see it, but I know it's true because I have affirmation elsewhere. And that's where you get so many men who might be CEOs and heads of companies and being really successful whose marriages are falling apart. It's because they've answered the question in the wrong arena. You
Mm.
answer that question in the doors of your own home more so than you do anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So
Dude, I've spoken often about my wife and I. So we had a very difficult first 3 years of marriage, and lot of conflict, a lot of fighting, a lot of just things that we said things that took us a long time to recover from. And I remember it was my first full-time position. I was a pastor, and the church was growing super fast. We were seeing a ton of success, as the world would measure it. And I remember saying to her, I'm such a good listener. You can't tell me I'm not good at listening. I'm a pastor. It's literally my job to listen to people and to care for them and to empathize with them and walk with them. That's literally what I do for a living. So don't tell me that I can't listen and then I don't, you know what I mean? And I think back, dude, about some of those conversations I had, and I was missing the entire point. And I would do the
yeah,
same thing, man. I'd escape and I'd go back into ministry and I'd be like, because I'd crush it. And then until one of my mentors said, I was like, because I'd say to them, I'm like, I don't know how to figure this out. Like, how is it that I'm not a good listener? How is it that I'm not, caring for her and loving her? And this is what I do as a profession, right? And
yeah.
he asked me a question which I'll never forget. He said, "How many of those people that you're leading are you sleeping with?" And I was like,
Man, what a way to cut to the core. That's awesome.
right? And he's like, "Listen, man, you're treating your most intimate relationship with your spouse the same as you're treating every other person that you have. Like that, those relationships are entirely different. So stop using the same principles on this intimate relationship with your wife. It doesn't make sense to do that." And dude, it was a pivotal moment in my life where I'm like, wow.
All right. If I get in that situation, I might use that same statement.
Right?
He said. That was a really good one.
Because we use the same principles on different relational dynamics. Like, why in the world would you treat your spouse the same way that you treat your colleagues or the people you're caring for, right? It's totally different. There's a whole new level of intimacy that requires different nuance, and it requires you to show up in a different way. It requires you, so many different things, right? So, anyways, yeah, pull that out of your pocket sometime.
Um, the next one, I think I remember it was that your marriage to your wife, um, that is the most important thing when it comes to teaching your kids how to be good people.
Mm,
Like that's the most important part of my fatherhood is my marriage to my wife, not things that I do with my sons. If you think about that, I teach my kids a lot of things, right? How to be patient, how to be kind, how to be tough and resilient, how to work hard. Kids don't primarily learn through listening to you lecture about stuff. That's great. Like you should say the things, they should hear those words when they're an adult. I could still remember things my dad said to me, but that he didn't back them up was a huge hurdle for me to overcome. So, for instance, he would have said that he was a Christian, but the inconsistency with his drug use and his faith was a thing I had to overcome when I had my own journey to believing in Christ. If I had seen this perfect confluence with, oh, he talks about grace and loving, and I see in the way he loves my mom, those things being worked out. Even if it's, he says that we need to be gracious and that we're not perfect and he's not perfect. So every time he messes up and yells at my mom or they argue or something, he's asking for forgiveness. Like he's repairing, he's admitting when he did something that wasn't right. And I, as a child, saw those conversations and saw that worked out. Every other lesson he taught me, I'm now seeing it modeled.
mm,
Um, those are the ways that my sons really learn. So when they see me and my wife in conflict and they see me raise my voice, they're gonna know that that's what you do. Like not only are they gonna be more willing to do that to my wife when I'm not home, when they're 15 and 16, dad raises his voice to mom. Why would we do anything different? When she talks that way to him, he gets mad and starts saying these dismissive, critical, gaslighting things. Well, why don't we do that? We're learning how to gaslight from watching dad gaslight mom, right? And then they're going to do that to their own wives. I found that even though I was dead set against doing that, if I saw my dad do horrible things to my mom, I was like, I will never do that. The first time I did do that to my wife, I had a crisis moment. I couldn't believe I had become the very man I so feared becoming because I saw it. I saw if you are in a fight and you can't win the fight and you are exhausted, you can win by being domineering. You can yell louder and win the fight. I remember the first time I raised my voice. I would actually say the first time and the last time.
mm.
My oldest son was like, he's 12 now. He was like 3. I don't even remember what we were fighting about, which is how it works. You remember what you did, but you don't actually remember the fight. And I hit my limit and I yelled like full on man voice, as intimidating I was could be. And he was in the bathtub and he cried. He was scared. He'd never heard that before. And she was scared. And then she said, we're leaving. We're leaving the house. I instantly, when I heard him cry, like it snapped me back to reality. Like, what are you doing right now? I quickly apologized, and that I have raised my voice in heated arguments, but I have never yelled at my wife since that moment. But it came out when I didn't want it to. And so, anyway, back to the point, you're showing your kids how to be the man you tell them to be through your relationship with your wife. And that is going to be a stronger teaching tool than anything you tell them. Um, Not only that, it's just that marriage is the bedrock of their emotional safety.
Mm.
If they think that thing is unstable, that you might leave or whatever that is, um, that rocks your children's world. Like they know that, they can see that, and children are resilient, but it affects them. Here's another aspect of it: like your wife's health. If she is overworked, overburdened, if she's lost and burned out in motherhood, and you don't have the ability to support her or to come in and help relieve her and give her the space so she can be healthy, right? So she can have rest and have personal time for herself. So she is snapping at people more. She's less patient. She's more exasperated. Your kids feel that too. You have to keep your marriage healthy If you do that, your wife's able to be a more gracious, loving parent to your children because you're pouring into her and now she can pour into them. If you guys are constantly in survival mode and at each other's throats, like your kids see that example from you, it comes out in your wife's relationship to them. Your marriage is the bedrock of your fatherhood. So that was a huge thing. Everything else has to take second place when my marriage is not doing well, whatever that is, work, anything else has to come second. Major life changes have to happen if your marriage is falling apart. I'm talking, I feel like a lot of men don't realize how extreme that is. I'm like, if you're working too much, change jobs. Like that may mean, and this is extreme, but if you have to go from 250 grand a year, whatever job you have, to 80 grand a year, that will save your marriage. Save your marriage. If you have to move from a house that's, $700,000 to $230,000 because you need to be out from under the pressure of that mortgage, you have to do that. Like the marriage has to come first. And I know you still need to provide and it's a balance, but the marriage is the bedrock for the rest of it. So guard that's your number one thing that you need to guard it, as a father.
Completely agree, man. And there's a couple quick one-liners that come to my mind that I've seen to be. I mean, these are probably platitudes at this point, or but lessons are caught, not taught. I mean, that's so true in fatherhood and
Yeah.
marriage. And your kids are gonna do what you do, not do what you say. They will do what you do before they will do what you say. For me, I mean, that just resonated. And I think that really well just kind of encapsulates sort of what you're saying. It's so incredible. Now, you were talking about marriage and how your third point, fourth point, wherever we're at, was what makes you a successful man in the real world can make you a terrible father and husband. And you kind of alluded to some of these things
Yeah.
just a moment ago. So can you unpack that one a little bit for us?
Yeah. So I believe I get in trouble on the internet for this, but I believe that men and women have traits and things that resonate with them just at a fundamental level that make them different from each other. Each human being has a different level of kind of like masculine and feminine energy. On the whole, like men and women, I feel like are fundamentally different. And the professional world, I do think honors traditionally masculine traits over other traits. So, I mean, things like being aggressive, competitive, kind of rational and objective, which is funny because in my marriage, my wife is the more rational one and I'm the more like emotional, artsy one, which is a funny twist on it. Um, so, when I go to work, there are things that actually hinder me, like being empathetic. Sometimes you just have to make hard choices, sticking to schedules and deadlines and productivity. And you want these quantifiable metrics that you can point to. We hit this sales goal, we got this thing accomplished, or whatever else. And sometimes you're in competition with other people for promotions, for sales, or with other companies. And all those things can make you really successful. And a lot of those, like aggressive, competitive things, lie in traditionally like masculine energy type things. But when you go home, having those same qualities to the exclusion of other things that you need, it doesn't work out well. So for instance, if you want to stick to a schedule and a deadline and you're going to be impatient with your kids, their meltdowns and their emotions and their temper tantrums are not going to follow your clock in time like you have at work. It's going to cause you to be more impatient and more frustrated with your kids. And a lot of these different aspects, if you can't find the balance to what are extreme masculine things to things that are more feminine, I feel like you become a one-sided man, a caricature of a man. So I always use this guy as an example just because he seems extreme. But Andrew Tate's really popular right now. So this idea of like being really macho, not giving a crap, pursuing like money and success. And that's the way to be, and like being a good fighter and being tough, all these things. But if you're a dad, sometimes you need, like, toughness isn't always what you need. And you need to have the wisdom to know with your kids, like, am I being tough with them right now? Is that the lesson they need? Or do they need a hug right now? Do they need to be compassionate? Like, if they fall on, and so this is funny. This is a difference I feel like between men and women is that when my kid falls on their bike, my wife instantly hears them cry. That gives her anxiety. She wants to go take care of them. I instantly look at them and think, what is my job right now? Is it for them to have to get up and walk it off and be tough? Or do I need to go over there, put a band-aid on it, blow on it, and pat them on the back? So for me, understanding that balance, but those kind of things often are not rewarded in the professional world.
Mm.
So I think that's what I'm getting at. So I get this idea of the whole man, or if you think of Travis's page, the integrated man. I like that wording, where you are emotionally intelligent, but you also have the toughness in those things, but you don't have one to the exclusion of the other. I put it that way. The things that reward you in the professional world hurt you at home, because I have a tendency towards those things. In society, we also see men go the other way, where they're too effeminate, too passive, too agreeable, too like a nice guy, or too like friend zoning kind of a guy. And they lack backbone, and they do it from a good motive. But what is needed at the home is a balance of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to have stoicism tempered with empathy. You need to have aggression. You need to be able to be aggressive. I always give this example. If the house is burning down, I want that fireman to be aggressive and get in that house and save that child, right? There needs to be no qualms about that, or like, oh, aggression is bad because that leads to anger. Like, no, aggression is good, but it needs to be tempered also with patience, with empathy, with grace. So you need to be a whole man, and not just the things where you get the question of, am I enough? Where you get those affirmations in the work world, that can't be the only attributes you pursue, because it's the lowest hanging fruit to feel like a man, right? You've also got to have compassion, emotional intelligence, and these things as well.
Wow, I agree. Surprise, surprise. Spoiler alert. I agree with you. But the way I've looked at it, I guess it's another framework of looking at it is, we talk about masculinity, and we're living in a world where masculinity is a taboo word, and it's tricky. A lot of people call it toxic. I'm not talking about toxic masculinity. I'm talking about pure essence of a masculine man. The traditional role, of say our fathers and their fathers, there were some great things that we can pull from there. However, it's a bit of a dated model. There are some things that maybe we want to leave back there. But there were some fantastic things like, being assertive and knowing how to lead your home and all those different things. However, there was a lot of issues with, lack of emotional intelligence and so many other things. What I love on the other side of the pendulum is like what you're talking about is this understanding of what it looks like to be a great man, a great father. And with that comes emotional intelligence. It comes knowing how to control your anger, the pursuit of wisdom, all that kind of stuff, knowing how to practice empathy, showing up for your kids in that way. And I see it, if you will call it modern masculinity, is a beautiful middle of the pendulum of both, where and that's that balance. At least that's the balance I'm always shooting for, is like, how do I find the middle road here? How do you know when to be assertive, when to be competitive, when to be aggressive, when to be very driven and motivated, and also when do you know how to just turn it down a little bit and practice empathy, practice thoughtfulness, practice nurturing, all that kind of stuff. Would you say that we're kind of talking about the same thing here?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like society in general, just layman's perspective, we always have this tendency to overcorrect and like go to extremes. And I blame social media for a little bit of that, because, I don't know if you've experienced this. Anytime you touch on an extreme in a video, like often that's the one that does really well. Like people want to hear those extremes. The tension of living in the middle and having to have the wisdom to know what is needed in this moment is a lot harder place to live in. But yeah, we go on these swings from the really masculine to the really feminine, and I think both extremes, if they're done to the exclusion of the other, are toxic. Like you can have the toxic effeminate man. Like I said earlier, he's the guy that never stands up for himself, has no backbone, and won't say his needs or stand up for what's right. And you can't trust that guy because you don't know what he's really thinking. Whereas the other guy you can't trust because he's just going to bulldoze his way and get his way because like it's his way or the highway. So finding that middle path and living it with integrity and consistency, I think, is where trust, love, and being a man lies.
Mm, great. Yep, 100%, man. Agree. We got time for one more. We got about 10 minutes. So I want to just read one of the ones that you sent me because I'd love for you to just unpack it a little bit. You had wrote, I am not the man I would want to raise my sons to be. I cannot model the man for them, but I can model growth. Through that growth, I become more of the man I want to show them how to be.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And it kind of comes back to that question of being enough. But so here's a good story. So the other night, my son was watching, he's 12. And so we get into Lord of the Rings. We've been reading Lord of the Rings. We relate that to a lot of other huge life lessons. So he's watching Rings of Power. We decided he's old enough to watch the show with some parental like guidance over it. He's allowed to watch one show and he decided to watch two because Netflix will just keep playing or Amazon will just keep playing it. And we came in and my wife was like, you were only supposed to watch one show. Why did you watch two? He was kind of evading it. He was like, well, I thought you would just come and turn it off. While she was getting on to him, randomly there were some fireworks outside. So he left the conversation to go and look at the fireworks. And Rachel was like, I'm talking to you. Give me your full attention and come back. And he got disrespectful. He was like, I can listen to you and look at the fireworks at the same time. And then I came down at that moment and I was like, what did you just say to your mom? So we set him down and I was trying to give him an example of what it feels like to talk to you and not have someone's full attention. So I said, hey, have you ever tried to come and ask me something when I'm on my phone? I pull my phone out when I'm doing this and you're trying to tell me about your day. And I gave him that example. And then I set my phone down and, modeled versus when you ask and I say, hey man, how is your day going? Like, come over and pull up a seat and sit down and let's talk about it. It's like, which one of those situations do you feel like you're really being listened to? He goes, the second one. And then he was mad. So he tried to get a jab in. He goes, but you do that all the time. You always look at your phone when I'm trying to talk to you. And as soon as he said that, I was like, I wanted to get really mad. And I had all these things read, like locked and loaded. I'm like, well, you're a child. I'm an adult. Okay. Your mom's your authority. And first I want to say, just go to your room. If you're going to have that attitude with me, just get out of here. Right. That's a side note. As your kids get older and they get disrespectful or they say things, they know how to actually hit your real insecurities and not just say blanket statements like, I hate you, mom, or I hate you, dad, or this is they'll say things that actually matter to you because they know they're getting smarter. So he said that to me in many moments when those things have been said, I've taken the bait. I've gotten angry. I've yelled back. He tried to escalate it and I escalated it, right? Because I did not have in those moments the maturity to be regulated, to be patient. And then I started doing the very thing back to him that I'm getting onto him for doing in the first place. So when I do that, it tells me two things. That one, now I've got to repair and I have growth to do. It's really important because if I don't repair that, if I lash out at him, he is going to take away. Dad is not doing the things that he preaches. Like we're coming on similar things, I know over again, because it's not that these things are hard to know, it's that they're hard to do. Like we're saying truths that most of us know how to do, that we know we should do. It's just hard to actually do them. So whenever I do fail to do the things I teach them, in order for me to remain, to have integrity remain, and to not become a hypocrite, I have to go apologize and repair that with them so that they don't say they don't say later, yeah, but when you get mad at mom, you yell at her, so why can't I yell at her? Or, whatever it is. I don't want them throwing that back. I need to be able to say in that situation, yeah, but if I raise my voice at your mom or if I get argumentative, I'm wrong. And I apologize to my mom. I'm sorry, to your mom. Or when I do that to you guys, when I get short and I get impatient, like you just did with your brother, I apologize to you guys when I was wrong. And so I remain a respectable authority figure with integrity. And then I could say, let's both grow. We both need to grow. So it was awesome when he did that to me the other night. This was literally 3 nights ago. I was totally able to keep it cool. And I was like, yes, son, I do that sometimes. But how does that make you feel? And so the avenue he totally wanted to go down he couldn't. He had to say, it does make me feel like you're not listening. I'm like, okay, well, that's what you just did to your mom. She feels like you're not listening when you go look at the fireworks.
Mm,
So you need to show her the respect that you want me to give to you.
mm,
Right. So he both, I can use that so much later. I can say, hey, man, you tried to entice me into a fight and I've modeled growth. And even if I mess up, I can model repair.
mm,
To me, that's the only way you keep your integrity. And then when your kids become teenagers and they get mad at you and they want to throw everything back at you and whatever, you can still say, yeah, I know I'm not perfect. I was never trying to be the perfect dad,
mm.
but I do repair things and I'm always trying to grow. And that's all I'm ever asking of you is to repair and to keep growing. So
Wow.
really important.
Yeah, so good, man. Thank you. So good. Learning upon learning upon learning there. Just a last quick question for you before we wrap up our time together. And this is a question I ask everybody, every guest on the show for the most part. And it's a question I often think about myself. And it's a question somebody asked me that was really as a catalyst to me changing in my life. But I want you to picture for a moment that, unfortunately you had passed away and your funeral had just finished up and your kids are sitting around the table and your wife are sitting around the table and you have this ability to be a fly on the wall, or maybe you have this out of body experience. Everyone is left and they're just sitting around and they're telling stories about the man you were, the father you were. What are some of the things that you would want your children to say about who you were, the father you were, and the life that you lived?
That's a great question. Um, there's two things that immediately jump out at me. Um, One is just simple, like dad loved us. Right? I would want them to say that, but more than that, it's like he delighted in us.
Mm,
He liked being a dad. Like he took joy in us. We always knew how much we mattered to him. Um, I hope that they feel that uh, when I'm gone. And we haven't touched on this in this talk, but my grounding force in my life has been my faith in Christ. And I do hope that they take that away, that they say, Dad loved God, like all the stuff that made him who he was, that helped him through the hard times, that helped him love us, that shaped his soul and the person he was. He got all that from Jesus
mm,
and from his relationship with Christ. And that's very nuanced. I know all your listeners may not be Christian, and that's fine. But I do want to make a distinction. I am not talking about a religion that I followed a bunch of rules and did a bunch of stuff like that. I want them to know, no, he had this relationship with Christ. That's much more mysterious and much less tangible than I feel like what religion is. But they'll know, like, he loved Christ, and that changed his heart so much that enabled him to be the dad that we felt, that we knew he loved us.
mm.
Um, Man, I feel like if those two things stick with them around that table, I don't know how else to say it. Like, because I'm a Christian and believe in heaven, I feel like I would go up and I would see Jesus and be like, high five, man. Like, I did it. Like, I,
Nice.
I succeeded. Like, I left them with the things that they needed to be left with
Mhm.
to go forward without me.
Cool. Well,
So,
thank you for sharing, man. I appreciate that. And just as we wrap up, I know that there's going to be a bunch of people who want to hear more from you after this episode. So, where can they find you on the interwide webs?
yeah, so the main thing is Instagram. Like I said, I didn't know that Instagram was going to be anything, but it is now. And so I really try to be on there pretty regularly with a few things a week, just insights or whatever. But that's honest_fatherhood is my Instagram page. I did just start doing YouTube so I could go a little bit deeper. Like just started it a few weeks ago. But it's Honest Fatherhood is the YouTube page. Of course, you could search maybe my name, which is Daniel Grose. Same thing on my Facebook page. My Facebook is just me. It's just my personal page. So you have to look up my name, which is Daniel Grose again. But all of my Instagram stuff goes on the Facebook. But yeah, if they want some longer form stuff, that's going to be out on the YouTube page because Instagram is not made for depth.
Yeah.
It's really made for width. But pretty soon on there, I'm going to have, I've been working on a couple books. They'll be coming out. and some other different things as I journey into this path of helping fathers. I'll be doing some more stuff in that route.
Mm,
So hopefully within the next 6 months, I'll have some books. I want to start doing some speaking engagements about this. I love public speaking, and possibly some coaching if I feel like I can do that well.
cool. Well, I'll tell you what, man, I'll put all the links. You can send me the YouTube link. I'll put them all in the show notes below. So, guys, for those of you who are listening today, just do me a favor and go follow him on Instagram, because I will guarantee you this, that you will be inspired, that you will be challenged, with new content all the time. And so that way you'll hear of when he launches his books, because I can almost guarantee that that is going to be awesome as well. So, Daniel, listen, thank you so much for your time today. And honestly, it was a pleasure and a joy to speak with you. You just brought a ton of value to the guys listening. And I know that this is just going to be such a popular episode with my guys. So thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man. Have a good day.
You too. Wow, what an incredible episode. Listen, if you are watching on YouTube today, I want to hear from you, okay? Leave it in the comments below. What was the big takeaway for you? What was that big aha moment? And let's start the conversation. If you've listened to this episode and you've decided that you want help today, if you need coaching, if you need some resources, feel free to please reach out to me. My email is mitchell@dadnationco.com. My website is dadnationco.com. You can hit me up on Instagram @dadnationco. And I've got a ton of resources for you. I'm here to help you, support you in any way I can, and to serve you in a powerful way. So check those links. I'll have them posted below. But other than that, listen, I'm here for you. I'm in your corner. Have an incredible week. We'll catch up soon.